So today in this lesson, we're going to be finding two things. We're going to be finding and graphing equations by finding their x and y intercepts. And we're also going to be graphing equations. We're going to be writing equations in standard form. And so we have two things going on. Let's go ahead and get started with the first things. Let's start by just reviewing a little bit. These type of graphs cause confusion for people sometimes. When it's just a y equals a -2 or a x equals 4. Let's say we have y equals 2. We know that our y-axis is here. And so where is the -2 on our y-axis? We have the positive values up above. We have the negative values down below. Right here is where -2 is at. And it doesn't really matter what the x value is. This particular point is when x is 0, y is -2. But x could be 4 and y could be -2, or x could be -4 and y is -2, or x could be 9 and y is -2. What we have here is all of these points on this horizontal line. Those are all the points where the y value will be -2. So when we have y equals a number, it's always going to be horizontal. Now it could be something like this. It could be y equals 4, and it would be a line about here. Y equals 8 would be up here. Y equals -7 would be down here, but they're always going to be a horizontal line. The opposite of that is when x equals a number. So if we look over here at x equals 4, so we have x equals 4. We know x equals 4 is right there. Here's the x-axis. But x could be 4 even up here. X could be 4 when y is 4. X could be 4 and y could be 10. X could be 4 and y could be -4. And so what we're going to have is a vertical line here where all of the values are when we have an x that is equal to 4. If we had x equals 2, it'd be all of these lines, or x equals -5 would be all of these lines. And so whenever we have x equals a number, it's always going to be a vertical line that hits the x-axis at whatever the number is. And so that's how we graph those type of equations. Let's move on and take a look at equations that are in standard form. Yesterday we graphed equations, but we put them in slope-intercept form. Remember, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. And while that is a good way to graph them, because we'll know what the slope is and we'll know what the y-intercept is, there is another way that we could graph these that sometimes is even easier, and that's just by finding the intercepts. Where does it cross the y-axis? That would be the y-intercept. Where does it cross the x-axis? That would be the x-intercept. And so we know, let's take a look at these two things. We know that wherever it crosses the y-axis, if it crosses it here, it's going to be at the point 0,5. If it crosses it here, it'd be at the point 0,3 or 0,1 or 0, -2. But it's always going to be 0 something. So to figure out what the y-intercept is, we're going to plug a 0 in for x. So if we plug a 0 in for x, that means this x right here is going to be 0. And 4 times 0 is just 0. And so then we'll just have the -6 times y equals -24. And so -24. And so we're going to figure out what y is. And if I divide both of those sides by -6, I'll have -24 divided by -6, which is +4. And so the y-intercept is right here at +4. Then if I want to figure out where it crosses the x-axis, it could cross it right here, which would be when x is 2, y is 0. That's the point 20, or 40, or 50, or it could be -30. But it's going to be something 0, which means the y value is going to be 0. And so now what I'm going to do is plug in the 0 in for the y. So this whole thing will be equal to 0. And so 6 times 0 is 0, and so it's like this is not there, and I'll have the equation 4 times x equals -24. And we could divide by 4, and what we'd end up with is -6. And so this is going to be the point at -6, Here is the x-axis. And we know the line goes through those 2 points. It hits the x-axis here, it hits the y-axis here. And so we're just going to draw a line through those 2 points, and that's our graph. The nice thing about this, we don't have to convert it to y equals mx plus b. We can just plug in zeros. If I follow the same reasoning over here, I'm just going to plug in a 0 for x and a 0 for y. And when I plug a 0 in for x, this term right here will disappear. And I'll just have 2 times y equals -8. And so if I divide both sides by 2, I'll get that y is -4. And so the y-intercept is going to be down here at -4. Then I can do the same thing for x. I'm going to find the x-intercept by letting y be 0, which means this term is going to be 0. And I'll just have -4 times x equals -8. And we could divide both sides by -4. We're going to know that the x value is going to have to be a 2. And so that means the x-intercept is at 2, which is right here. So we had a y-axis of -4, a y-intercept of -4, and an x-intercept of 2. And so if I draw a line that goes through those 2 points, it's going to look something like that. And so that's just a nice way to graph linear equations that are in standard form without having to put them into slope-intercept form. Sometimes the numbers don't come out to be nice, even numbers like 2 and -4. But sometimes if they're fractions, we might have to go, if it's 3.5, it'd be an intercept right here at 3.5. And so also, it doesn't always, it looks like there's a relationship between -4 and -4, 2 and 2, but that was a coincidence. I probably could have picked different numbers and those numbers would be different. So that's how we can find the x and y intercepts and use those intercepts to graph equations that are in standard form. So one other thing that we want to do today is we want to take equations that are not in standard form and write them in standard form. So we're going to have to remember to do that standard form is a times x plus b times y equals c. That means the x and the y are on the same side of the equation. And so we're going to start here with this first equation. We want to get the x and the y on the same side of the equation. So that means I need to move this 3x over here. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So this will be canceled out. The 3x minus 3x is 0. So then I'll have -3x plus y equals 4. And so that is that equation in standard form. So we can continue that with this one. We really want to get the x and the y on the same side. So I'm going to move the 2/3 x over here. So I'm going to subtract 2/3 x from this side, and I'm going to subtract 2/3 x from this side. And so those will disappear, and I'll have -2/3 x plus the y value, which is up here, that equals 2. Technically, this is in standard form. However, if you take the SAT test or the ACT test, you're not going to see an equation that is in standard form as an answer that looks like that, simply because they're going to want to write it without fractions. And so we can get rid of those fractions by simply multiplying by the common denominator. In this case, the common denominator is 3. There's only one fraction. So I'm going to multiply everything in the whole equation by 3. So if I take 3 times -2/3, the 3's will cancel, and I'll have -2x, plus 3 times y is 3y, equals 2 times 3 is 6. And this equation is in standard form. So there are even times when you might see this on an SAT test or an ACT test where it doesn't look exactly like that either. Sometimes they don't want to start with a negative number. They want to start with a positive number. So if we multiplied here everything on both the left side and the right side of the equation by -1, then -2 times -1 would become a positive 2x. 3y would become a -3y, and instead of equaling 6, it would equal -6. Both of these answers, I would say, are good answers in standard form that we would want to use instead of an answer that is a fraction. So let's take a look at this last one. Again, we want to start by getting the x and the y on the same side of the equation. So I'm going to add the 1/2 x so it moves over to the left side of the equation. I'm going to add 1/2 x to this side, and I'm going to add 1/2 x to this side. So the -1/2 x and the positive 1/2 x will cancel each other out. And then on the left-hand side, I would have 1/2 x plus the y equals 3/4. But again, we have fractions, and we want to get rid of those fractions. So we have two fractions this time, and so we want to multiply by what they both go into. 2 and 4 both go into 4, so we want the least common multiple. Okay, the least common denominator, the 2 and the 4 both go into. And so that's a 4. I'm going to multiply everything here by 4. So 1/2 times 4, well, that's 2x, plus y times 4 is 4y, equals 3/4 times 4 is 3. So in standard form, this equation would simply be 2x plus 4y equals 3. So that's the third thing that we're doing today. We're taking the equations, all of these equations happen to be in slope-intercept form, and we're changing them and putting them into standard form. And that's what we're working on our homework assignment today. Good luck with that, and we will see you tomorrow in class.